What's the most profitable way parents exploited their kids? Every summer, my family would make sure one of us kids would get injured at a different corporation's property. Slip and falls at Walmart, food poisoning at McDonald's, dog bites at pet stores. My parents would collect the settlement, usually around $30,000, then miraculously, we'd have a full recovery. They called it teaching us acting skills. Really, it was a lawsuit factory. I watched my brother Aaron do his first performance at 7. My parents had him eat expired seafood to induce real vomiting at a Red Lobster. He projectile vomited on 3 tables while my mom screamed about negligence. They collected $35,000 in settlement while Aaron spent a week with food poisoning. When we got home, my father high-fived him for the security cameras. College fund, he laughed, knowing it went straight to their gambling debts. My sister Angela broke protocol once. She was supposed to slip at Target, but she actually fell wrong and fractured her wrist for real. My parents were thrilled. Real injuries meant bigger payouts. They got $75,000, and Angela got nerve damage that still makes her hand shake. I spent years preparing for my performances, learning to cry on command, hold my breath until I turned blue, make myself hyperventilate. My mother, who worked as a paralegal, drilled me constantly on testimony. What do you say if they ask about previous incidents? This has never happened before. We love this store. Wrong answers meant no dinner. Everything changed when I turned 14. My chemistry teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, mentioned something odd. Interesting that your family has had 17 accidents requiring settlements in the past decade. Statistical anomaly. My blood froze. Your cousin mentioned it before graduating, he continued carefully, leaving printouts about fraud on his desk where I could see them. Criminal charges, foster care, federal investigation. My biggest performance came at 15. My parents had upgraded their ambitions. They wanted me to get assaulted by a security guard at a high-end mall. The story. Overzealous guard thought I was shoplifting, got physical, trauma ensued. The potential payout, $250,000, but it required real bruises. The night before, my father hit me repeatedly with a phone book. Doesn't leave specific marks, just general bruising. My mother documented everything with photos, practicing her sob story. You're going to college debt-free, Dad said, punching my ribs. You're welcome. At the mall, I was supposed to pocket something small, get caught, then escalate the situation by resisting. The security guard would naturally restrain me, we'd claim excessive force, cash out. But the guard they picked was a 22-year-old kid, barely older than me. When I pocketed the item, he just said quietly, "Hey man, want to put that back?" No trouble needed. I was supposed to run, make him chase me. Instead, I froze. You okay? He asked, noticing my bruises. Someone hurt you? The breaking point was my cousin Jamie. 8 years old, the minimum age my family considered trainable. Her parents had found a new angle, emotional distress from racist incidents at stores. They were coaching her to provoke reactions they could sue over. The night before Jamie's first performance, I made a choice. I slipped her my old phone with everything documented. 20 years of fraudulent lawsuits, medical records proving fake injuries, their actual playbook with instructions for each scam. If you get scared, I whispered, you call this number. It's a detective who's been investigating our family. The next morning, they took Jamie to perform at a department store, but instead of following the script, she walked up to security and handed them the phone. My parents are making me fake injuries for money, she said clearly. There's proof on here. The FBI raid hit 12 houses simultaneously. Parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, 3 generations of grifters, 87 fraudulent lawsuits over 20 years, 4 million in stolen settlements. At the trial, my father screamed that I'd destroyed the family. We gave you everything. You gave me PTSD and permanent trust issues, I replied. But here's what the FBI found that changed everything. One of our cousins hadn't survived his performance. What they'd called a drowning accident at a hotel pool had been murder. They'd killed him for a $2 million settlement. I sit in the courtroom completely numb as the FBI agent explains how my cousin didn't drown accidentally. They killed him because a $2 million wrongful death settlement was worth more than his life, and they staged it to look like hotel negligence. The agent shows surveillance footage from the hotel pool area with timestamps proving my aunt and uncle were there when it happened. He explains how they held my cousin underwater while pretending to try to save him for the cameras. The medical examiner found bruising on his shoulders, consistent with being forcibly held down. My hands are shaking so badly I have to grip the armrest to keep them still. The courtroom erupts with family members screaming denials while I just stare at my hands. My father is yelling about lies and conspiracies, while my mother sobs dramatically for the jury. But all I can think about is that I performed in this same operation that killed a kid. I knew they were bad, but I didn't know they were murderers, and suddenly every performance I ever did feels like I was part of something even darker. The judge pounds his gavel for order, but the screaming continues for several minutes. Security guards move toward my relatives as the shouting gets louder. I feel like I might throw up right there in the courtroom. That night in my foster placement, I can't sleep because I keep thinking about my cousin who I barely remember. He was only 6 when he drowned, and I was too young to understand what really happened back then. I lie in the unfamiliar bed staring at the ceiling while my foster parents sleep down the hall. Every time I close my eyes, I see that surveillance footage of the pool. I try to remember his face, but I was only 4 years old, and the memories are fuzzy. I remember him at a family barbecue laughing at something, but I can't remember his voice. The foster home is quiet, except for the sound of a clock ticking somewhere in the house. I get up and walk to the bathroom just to move, just to do something other than lie there thinking about murder. My reflection in the mirror looks wrong, like I'm seeing a stranger who helped kill people. My court-appointed therapist does an emergency session the next morning because my foster parents reported I was having panic attacks. I sit in his office while he asks me questions about how I'm feeling. He explains that learning about the murder isn't my fault, but my brain keeps insisting I should have known somehow. I tell him about lying awake all night seeing that surveillance footage over and over. He writes notes on his clipboard and says, "Trauma responses are normal after learning something this horrible." I ask him how I'm supposed to live knowing my family killed a kid for money. He doesn't have a good answer for that, just says we'll work through it together in therapy. I leave his office feeling exactly the same as when I walked in. The prosecutor calls me in to discuss whether I remember anything about my cousin's death. I tell her I was only 4 years old when it happened, but she says even small details might help prove premeditation. We sit in a conference room with recording equipment while she asks me questions about that summer. I try to explain that I barely remember him at all, just fragments of being at family events together. She shows me photos from the funeral trying to jog my memory. I stare at pictures of relatives I recognize crying and hugging each other. She asks if I noticed anything unusual about how my aunt and uncle acted at the funeral. I tell her I was 4 and mostly remember being confused about why everyone was sad. I force myself to remember that summer and recall my aunt crying at the funeral while my uncle comforted her. Now I realize they were acting even then, performing grief for the insurance investigators and police. I remember my uncle's arm around my aunt's shoulders while she sobbed into his chest. Everyone talked about what a tragedy it was and how devastated the parents were. The prosecutor writes down everything I say, even though it's not much. I remember my aunt collapsing at the graveside and my uncle catching her. People said she was, so broken by grief she could barely stand. But it was all fake, all part of the performance to sell the accident story. I feel sick thinking about how good they were at pretending to mourn the kid they murdered. Aaron finally agrees to meet with me for the first time since the arrests. He's living with a different foster family across town, and when I see him, he looks 10 years older than he should at 19. We meet at a coffee shop halfway between our foster homes with a social worker sitting at a nearby table. Aaron has dark circles under his eyes, and he's lost weight since I last saw him. He orders coffee and doesn't look at me for the first few minutes. I try to apologize for not acting sooner, but the words sound hollow even to me. He stirs his coffee slowly and stares out the window at the parking lot. The silence between us feels heavy and uncomfortable. Aaron tells me he's glad I exposed everything, but he can't forgive me for waiting so long. He suffered through 6 more years of performances after Rodriguez first warned me, and that's time he'll never get back. His voice is flat and tired when he talks about the expired seafood at Red Lobster. He says he still can't eat certain foods without feeling sick. I watch his hands shake slightly as he holds his coffee cup. He tells me about performances I didn't know about, injuries I never saw. There were more incidents after I turned 14, more staged accidents while I was too scared to act. He lists them like he's reading from a report, detached and mechanical. I try to explain that I was terrified and didn't know how to act, but Aaron cuts me off. He says I'm not the hero in this story. I'm just the one who finally got brave enough to save someone who wasn't himself. His words hit like a physical blow because they're true. I saved Jamie, but I let Aaron suffer for years before that. He asks me if I ever thought about him during those 6 years while I did nothing. I open my mouth, but no words come out, because what can I possibly say? He stands up and tells me he needs more time before we can be brothers again. I watch him walk out of the coffee shop and get into his foster parents' car. Angela reaches out through her foster family and asks to meet at a supervised visitation center. When I arrive, her hand is shaking from the nerve damage as she pours water, and I feel sick knowing our parents celebrated that injury. She sits across from me at a small table in a room with toys and books for younger kids. The shaking is worse than I remembered, her whole hand trembling as she tries to hold the cup steady. She notices me watching and puts the cup down quickly. A social worker sits in the corner reading a magazine but clearly listening to everything we say. Angela asks me how I'm doing, and I don't know how to answer that question anymore. I tell her I'm okay, but the words feel empty and meaningless. Angela watches me struggle to answer and says it's fine if I'm not ready to talk yet. She pours herself more water with her shaking hand and tells me she's been having nightmares about the target fall almost every night. In the dreams, she's falling in slow motion and can see our parents standing at the bottom with cameras and calculators instead of worried faces. She wakes up sweating and has to remind herself she's safe now, even though her hand still shakes as proof of what they did. Angela asks me a question that makes my stomach hurt. She wants to know if I think our parents would have eventually killed one of us if the settlements got big enough. I open my mouth to say no, but the word won't come out because I honestly don't know. After finding out about our cousin who drowned, I can't promise her anything about what our parents were capable of doing. Angela nods slowly, like my silence is the answer she expected, and says she thinks about it constantly. She wonders if her nerve damage saved her life by making her less useful for future performances. The social worker in the corner shifts in her chair and makes a note on her clipboard. We sit in uncomfortable silence for a few minutes before Angela says she forgives me for not acting sooner. She knows I was scared and just a kid too, even if part of her wishes I'd been braver earlier. I thank her, but the guilt still sits heavy in my chest because her forgiveness doesn't change the years she suffered. 3 days after meeting with Angela, I get a call from an FBI agent named Raymond Patton. He tells me he's building a complete timeline of every suspicious incident in our family history going back decades. Agent Patton wants to meet with me to go through old family photos and records to identify relatives and remember details about accidents I might have witnessed or heard about. He explains that the drowning wasn't the only death that looks suspicious now that they know what our family was really doing. I agree to meet him at the FBI field office the next afternoon. My foster parents drive me there and wait in the lobby while I'm escorted to a conference room filled with boxes of documents and photo albums. Agent Patton is older than I expected, with gray hair and tired eyes that make him look like he's seen too much terrible stuff. He shakes my hand and thanks me for coming in to help with the investigation. The table is covered with printed spreadsheets showing dates and settlement amounts going back 30 years. He opens the first photo album and asks me to identify everyone I recognize and tell him anything I remember about them. I point to pictures of aunts and uncles and cousins I haven't thought about in years. Agent Patton makes notes next to each name and asks specific questions about whether I remember them having accidents or getting hurt. We spend 3 hours going through albums, and I start recognizing patterns I never noticed before. 2 other childhood deaths that I thought were just sad accidents suddenly look different when Agent Patton shows me the settlement paperwork next to their photos. A cousin who supposedly fell downstairs and died from head trauma came with a $400,000 payout from a hotel. Another cousin who died from what they called sudden illness at a restaurant resulted in a $600,000 settlement. I feel sick looking at their faces in the photos, knowing they might have been murdered, just like the cousin who drowned. Agent Patton writes everything down and tells me this information is crucial for building the case. He says if they can prove a pattern of killing children for money, the charges get much more serious and the sentences get longer. I leave the FBI office feeling worse than when I arrived, because now I'm wondering how many kids in my family actually died from real accidents versus murder. The next week, my therapist, Fernandez, calls my foster parents and says he needs to increase our sessions to 3 times a week. When I show up for the first extra session, he explains that he's concerned about some things I said in our last meeting. I've been having what he calls intrusive thoughts about all the injuries I faked over the years. I can't stop thinking about the store employees who might have lost their jobs because of our false claims against them. The security guard at the mall who was so kind to me probably had to deal with an investigation because of the assault claim my parents wanted to file. The manager at Red Lobster who got blamed for Aaron's food poisoning might have been fired or demoted. All those people suffered real consequences because my family lied, and I was part of the lies. Fernandez tells me I was a victim and a child who had no choice, but I can't make the guilt go away. He says guilt is a normal response, but I need to separate what I was forced to do from who I actually am as a person. We work on exercises where I write down every incident I remember and then write down my age and what would have happened if I'd refused. Next to each one, I have to acknowledge that a 7-year-old or 10-year-old or even 14-year-old couldn't have safely stopped their parents. The exercises help a little, but the guilt still crushes me whenever I think about all the innocent people our family hurt. Fernandez says healing takes time, and we'll keep working on it 3 times a week for as long as I need. 2 weeks after my meeting with Agent Patton, I get called to the prosecutor's office. Victoria Manning sits across from me at a big desk covered with legal files and offers me a deal. She wants me to testify in detail about how the operation worked in exchange for guaranteed protection from any charges. I'm technically a minor victim, but she explains that some of my performances happened after I turned 14, which is old enough to be charged in some situations. The deal means I tell the jury everything I know about the coaching sessions and the planning and the actual performances. She needs me to explain exactly how my parents trained us and what they told us to say and do. In exchange, she'll make sure I'm treated only as a victim and witness instead of a possible defendant. I ask her what happens if I don't take the deal, and she says honestly she doesn't think they'd charge me anyway, but this makes it official and certain. I tell her I'll do it because I want my parents and everyone else in prison for what they did. Victoria nods and says, "We'll start preparation sessions next week to get me ready for testimony." The preparation with Victoria takes 2 weeks, and it's harder than I expected. She makes me relive every staged accident in detail, asking questions about exactly what my parents said and did during each one. We go through the Red Lobster incident with Aaron, and she wants to know every word my mother said while she screamed about negligence. I have to describe the phone book beatings and show her where my father hit me to create bruises. Victoria is patient, but thorough, never letting me skip details or gloss over the painful parts. She explains that the jury needs to understand exactly how calculated and cruel the operation was. We practice my testimony with her pretending to be the defense lawyer asking hostile questions. She tries to make me angry or confused or contradictory, and I have to stay calm and consistent. By the end of 2 weeks, I've told the story so many times I feel numb to it. Victoria says that's actually good because I need to stay composed on the stand, even when talking about terrible things. She tells me I'm doing great, and my testimony will be crucial for getting convictions. The day after we finish preparation, Victoria calls to tell me my father's lawyer filed a motion to subpoena my therapy records. They want to use my PTDD diagnosis to argue I'm mentally unstable and my testimony can't be trusted. I feel panic rising because those therapy sessions with Fernandez are private, and the idea of my father's lawyer reading them makes me sick. Fernandez calls me an hour later and says he's already filed paperwork to fight the subpoena. He tells me therapist-patient privilege is serious, and he won't let them violate it without a fight. The hearing on the motion happens 3 days later, and Fernandez shows up to argue against releasing my records. The judge listens to both sides and then makes a ruling that actually helps us. She says my PTSD from abuse makes me more credible as a witness, not less, because it proves I suffered real trauma from what my parents did. The therapy records stay private, and my father's lawyer looks angry when the judge denies his motion. Fernandez texts me after the hearing to say we won and my privacy is protected. Around the same time, I start getting updates about Jamie through her social worker. Her therapist reports that she's doing better than anyone expected considering what she went through. She's attending school regularly and making friends with kids in her foster home's neighborhood. But she has severe trust issues with adults that show up in specific ways. She flinches whenever someone raises their voice, even if they're not yelling at her. She gets anxious when people talk about money or buying things. Her foster parents are patient and understanding, working with her therapist to help her feel safe. The social worker tells me Jamie asks about me sometimes and wants to know if I'm okay. Hearing that makes me feel a little less terrible about everything, because at least I saved one person from the cycle. I decide to write Jamie a letter through the social worker since we're not allowed direct contact yet. I spend hours trying to figure out what to say to an 8-year-old about why I exposed her parents and got them arrested. Finally, I write that what I did was to protect her, not to hurt her mom and dad. I explain that her parents were doing something very wrong that would have hurt her badly if it continued. I tell her that being safe is more important than having your parents around if those parents are dangerous. I try to make it simple enough for a kid to understand without lying about how serious everything was. The social worker takes the letter and promises to give it to Jamie's therapist, who will read it with her. A week later, the social worker calls and tells me Jamie keeps my letter under her pillow, but hasn't written back yet. She says that's normal, and Jamie might need more time before she's ready to respond. Just knowing she kept the letter feels like something. The trial enters its 3rd week, and Victoria calls to tell me I'm being called to testify tomorrow. I barely sleep that night thinking about walking into a courtroom full of my relatives who all hate me for exposing them. My foster parents drive me to the courthouse in the morning, and we meet Victoria in a waiting room outside the courtroom. She goes over last-minute reminders about staying calm and answering only the questions asked. When the bailiff calls my name, I stand up and my legs feel shaky. Walking into that courtroom is like walking into a nightmare. My parents sit at the defense table with their lawyers, and my father stares at me with pure hatred in his eyes. Behind them in the gallery are aunts and uncles and cousins, at least 20 family members all looking at me like I'm a traitor. My mother won't even look at me, keeping her eyes down on the table. I walk to the witness stand feeling like I'm facing a firing squad, every step heavy and difficult. The bailiff swears me in, and I sit down in the chair facing the jury. Victoria stands up to begin questioning me, and I take a deep breath, trying to remember everything we practiced. This is it, the moment where I tell the truth about everything, and there's no going back. Victoria starts with basic questions about my age and how long the fraud operation affected me. I answer clearly and directly, keeping my voice steady even though my hands shake under the table where the jury can't see them. She asks me to describe a typical coaching session, and I explain how my mother would drill me for hours on what to say if questioned, making me repeat answers until they sounded natural and believable. Wrong answers meant going to bed hungry, so I learned fast how to perform exactly what they wanted. The jury takes notes while I talk, and I can feel my father's eyes burning into me from the defense table, but I don't look at him. Victoria moves to specific incidents and asks me to describe Aaron's Red Lobster performance. I tell them how my parents deliberately fed him expired seafood to make him sick, how he threw up all over 3 tables. While customers screamed and ran away, how my mother acted hysterical about negligence while my father filmed everything on his phone for evidence. Aaron was 7 years old and spent a week with food poisoning so bad he couldn't keep water down, but our parents celebrated because they got $35,000. Several jury members look horrified, and one woman in the front row wipes her eyes with a tissue. I describe coming home after the settlement and watching my father high-five Aaron for the security cameras, laughing about college funds while Aaron was still pale and weak from being sick. The questions continue for hours, and Victoria asks about Angela's Target fall. I explain how she was supposed to fake a slip, but actually fractured her wrist for real, and instead of being concerned about her injury, our parents were thrilled because real damage meant bigger payouts. They got $75,000, and Angela got permanent nerve damage that still makes her hand shake when she tries to write or hold things. I demonstrate how her hand trembles by holding up my own hand and shaking it slightly, and the jury watches with these awful expressions like they can't believe parents would do this to their own kids. Victoria asks about my own training, and I describe learning to cry on command, holding my breath until I turned blue, making myself hyperventilate on purpose. My mother drilled me constantly on testimony, making me practice answers to every possible question investigators might ask. I had to memorize exact phrases and deliver them with the right emotion, like an actor learning lines, except the consequences for messing up were way worse than a bad review. If I couldn't perform the answers perfectly, I didn't eat dinner that night, so I became really good at lying convincingly because hunger is a powerful motivator when you're a kid. The phone book beatings come next, and the courtroom gets very quiet. I explain how my father hit me repeatedly the night before the mall incident, using a phone book because it doesn't leave specific marks, just general bruising that looks like restraint injuries. My mother took photos of every bruise to document the damage, practicing her crying and her story about the aggressive security guard. I pull up my shirt slightly to show the jury some scars that are still visible on my ribs from that night, and the woman in the front row starts crying harder. Victoria asks if my father said anything while he was hitting me, and I repeat his exact words about college funds, and how I should be grateful, my voice flat and emotionless, because that's the only way I can get through this part without breaking down. The cross-examination starts after a short break, and my father's lawyer stands up with this aggressive posture, like he's going to destroy my credibility. He suggests I'm making everything up for attention, that maybe I'm hoping to write a book or get a movie deal out of this dramatic story. He points out that I'm 15 years old, and teenagers are known for exaggerating and seeking attention. So how can the jury trust anything I say when I clearly have motivation to lie? I feel anger rising in my chest, but I keep my voice calm and look directly at my father for the first time since entering the courtroom. I tell the lawyer I would give absolutely anything to have a normal family instead of this nightmare, that I wish more than anything that I was making this up and my parents actually loved me instead of viewing me as a walking paycheck. The lawyer keeps pushing, asking why I waited so long to report anything if the abuse was really that bad. He suggests that if things were truly as horrible as I claim, I would have told someone years ago instead of waiting until I was 15. I explain that I was terrified of what would happen, that my parents controlled everything in my life, including food and shelter, that I watched what happened to kids in foster care and was scared it would be worse than staying. I tell him about Mr. Rodriguez leaving those printouts where I could see them, about learning what criminal charges and federal investigations meant, about finally understanding there might be a way out that didn't end with me on the streets. 3 days after my testimony finishes, Victoria calls to tell me that 3 more cousins have come forward. They're distant relatives I barely know, but they all have similar stories about being forced into performances, coached on testimony, and threatened if they didn't cooperate. One cousin describes being 12 years old and told to provoke a dog at a pet store until it bit her, then acting traumatized while her parents collected $40,000. Another talks about being pushed downstairs at a shopping mall and told to say the railing was broken, even though it wasn't. The FBI realizes the operation is way bigger than they initially discovered, going back 30 years to my grandparents who apparently started this whole thing in the 90s. Agent Patton calls me directly the following week and asks if I can come to the FBI office for an interview. When I arrive with my foster parents, he sits me down in a conference room and explains they're now investigating 12 suspicious deaths across 3 decades. What started as a fraud case has become a potential serial murder investigation because the pattern is too clear to ignore. Multiple children in my extended family died under circumstances that resulted in massive insurance payouts, and the FBI believes at least some of these deaths were deliberate. He shows me photos of cousins I barely remember, kids who died when I was really young, and asks if I recall anything unusual about their deaths or the family's behavior afterward. I schedule an emergency session with Fernandez the next day because I can't stop thinking about those photos. When I sit down in his office, I try to explain what Agent Patton told me, but the words come out wrong and jumbled. Fernandez asks me to take deep breaths and slow down, but instead, I start talking faster about how my entire family is basically a murder cult that used children as disposable income sources. They didn't just exploit us for fraud. They actually killed kids when the payout was big enough, and I'm related to these people. I share their blood. I was trained to be just like them. My hands start shaking, and then my whole body is shaking, and I can't make it stop no matter how hard I try. Fernandez moves his chair closer and tells me I'm having a panic attack, but I can't stop shaking or thinking about those dead cousins, and how easily I could have been one of them if my performances had gone wrong or if I'd gotten injured badly enough to be worth more dead than alive. Fernandez eventually calls my foster parents to come get me because I'm not calming down, and he's worried I might hurt myself if I try to drive home in this state. They arrive 20 minutes later and find me still shaking on his couch, unable to speak coherently or stop the panic that's taken over my entire body. Aaron shows up at my foster home 2 days later without calling first. My foster mom answers the door and then comes to get me, saying my brother is on the front porch and wants to talk. I walk outside, and Aaron is sitting on the porch steps, staring at nothing, and I sit down next to him without saying anything. We stay like that for almost 2 hours, just sitting in silence while the sun moves across the sky and neighbors walk past with their dogs. Finally, Aaron speaks and says he doesn't forgive me yet for waiting as long as I did, for all the years he suffered while I was too scared to act. He says he understands I was just a kid too, that I was as trapped as he was, that fear makes people do things that don't make sense later. He says maybe someday we can actually be brothers again, instead of just two people who survived the same nightmare. I don't know what to say to that, so I just nod and we go back to sitting in silence. But this time, it feels slightly different, like maybe there's a tiny possibility of something better eventually. Aaron stands up after a while and says he needs to go, but he squeezes my shoulder briefly before walking away, and that small gesture makes me want to cry more than anything else that's happened. Angela calls me the next evening and she's crying so hard I can barely understand what she's saying. I ask her to slow down and breathe, and she finally manages to explain that Victoria showed her documents the FBI found. Our parents tried to take out a life insurance policy on Angela after her target injury, a big policy that would pay out if she died accidentally. Victoria thinks they were planning to kill her if the nerve damage got worse and she became less useful for performances, if she couldn't do the physical acting anymore and became more valuable dead than damaged. I get called back to the witness stand 3 days later, and Victoria walks me through the mall security guard incident again, this time with more specific questions about the injuries. She asks me to describe how my father hit me with the phone book, and I explain that he made me stand against the wall while he struck my ribs and back repeatedly, telling me the bruises needed to look random instead of patterned. The jury shifts in their seats, and a few people look away when Victoria displays the photos on the courtroom screen, images my mother took the night before, showing purple and yellow marks across my torso. One juror covers her mouth, and another starts crying quietly while I point out specific bruises and explain which hits caused each one. My father's lawyer tries to argue the photos could have been faked or taken at a different time, but Victoria produces metadata proving they were taken the exact night before the mall incident, along with text messages between my parents discussing camera angles and lighting. I have to describe standing in our bathroom while my mother adjusted the flash settings and told me to turn slightly so the bruising showed better, treating the whole thing like a professional photo shoot instead of documentation of child abuse. My mother's defense attorney stands up during the next session and argues that she was a victim too, claiming my father controlled and manipulated her into participating against her will. The lawyer shows the jury photos of my mother looking scared in some old family pictures and suggests she lived in fear of my father's anger if she didn't cooperate with his schemes. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. But then, Victoria plays audio recordings the FBI found on my mother's laptop, conversations she recorded herself as backup documentation in case the fraud ever got investigated. In one recording, my mother coaches me on testimony for a fake slip and fall, laughing as she describes how Aaron threw up on 3 tables at Red Lobster and how much money that performance earned. Another recording catches her telling my father they should increase my injuries for the mall incident because bigger trauma meant bigger settlements, discussing whether breaking my finger would be worth the extra payout. The jury's faces change completely as they listen to my mother's voice sounding happy and excited about hurting her own children for money, and several jurors glare at her lawyer when he tries to maintain she was somehow forced into this behavior. The social worker brings me a letter from Jamie 2 weeks after my second testimony, and I take it to my room before opening the envelope. Inside is a single sheet of paper with "Thank you for saving me," written in careful kid handwriting, along with a drawing of 2 stick figures holding hands with a sun in the corner. One figure has longer hair like Jamie, and the other is taller like me, and she drew hearts floating around both people. I sit on my bed staring at the drawing for a long time before the tears start, and once they begin, I can't stop them for over an hour. My foster mom checks on me twice, but I just shake my head and keep crying while holding Jamie's letter, thinking about how close she came to entering the same nightmare I spent my whole childhood trapped inside. The drawing goes into my desk drawer where I can look at it whenever I need to remember why I made the choice to expose everyone, even on days when the guilt about destroying my family feels overwhelming. Victoria calls me to her office downtown and tells me the defense attorneys approached her about plea deals for my parents and several other family members. She says they want to negotiate reduced sentences in exchange for guilty pleas and cooperation with ongoing investigations into other potential victims. I ask what she told them, and Victoria leans forward with her hands folded on the desk, saying she refused anything less than maximum sentences for every single person involved. She explains that she wants these people to die in prison for what they did to their own children, that the evidence is strong enough to win at trial, and she won't let them escape full punishment through negotiation. I feel this weird mix of relief and fear because part of me wants them locked up forever, but another part still remembers they're my parents and grandparents, people I lived with my entire life. Victoria must see something in my face because she adds that my feelings are normal and complicated, but the legal system needs to prioritize justice over family loyalty when children were murdered for insurance money. Dr. Fernandez spends our next session helping me work through the guilt about store employees and other people who got hurt by our fraud operation. I tell him about lying awake at night thinking about security guards who probably lost their jobs after we accused them of assault, or managers who got fired when we claimed food poisoning at their restaurants. He explains that I was a child victim forced to participate, and the responsibility belongs entirely to the adults who created and ran the operation. But my brain keeps insisting I'm somehow responsible for all the damage. We practice techniques for separating my actions as a controlled minor from my feelings about those actions now, but it's hard to accept that I wasn't guilty when I remember standing in court and lying under oath about injuries that never happened. Dr. Fernandez says healing means acknowledging I was both a victim and a participant without letting either truth cancel out the other, which sounds simple, but feels impossible when I'm actually trying to do it. Aaron shows up at my therapy appointment the following month, and Dr. Fernandez explains that he invited my brother to start attending once monthly so we can work on rebuilding our relationship. Aaron sits in the chair across from me, and we both stare at different corners of the room for the first 10 minutes while Dr. Fernandez asks gentle questions about our memories of each other before the arrests. The conversation is awkward and painful with long silences between responses, but Aaron eventually admits he wants to try having a brother again, instead of just being two people who survived the same nightmare. Dr. Fernandez says healing family bonds takes years of consistent effort, and we shouldn't expect quick progress or easy forgiveness, that showing up regularly is more important than feeling comfortable right away. By the end of the session, Aaron and I managed to talk for 5 minutes about his college classes, without either of us shutting down, which feels like a tiny victory, even though we're still basically strangers. Agent Patton calls my foster home and asks to meet with me and my foster parents about new developments in the investigation. We drive to the FBI office, and he shows us documents confirming that 2 other childhood deaths in our extended family were definitely murders staged as accidents. My aunt and uncle killed their own son for a settlement when he was 9 years old, making it look like he fell off playground equipment at a park they were suing. My grandparents helped plan that murder and provided coaching on how to act devastated for the insurance investigators, treating their grandson's death as a business transaction instead of a tragedy. Agent Patton explains they found emails between family members discussing which child would be easiest to kill without raising suspicion, evaluating their own kids like products based on how much money their deaths could generate. I feel sick reading the emails where my grandmother suggests my aunt's son because he was small for his age, and a fall would look more believable, like they were planning a grocery list instead of murdering a child. Victoria subpoenas me again to testify about what I remember of those cousins before they died, even though I was very young when both murders happened. I sit in the witness box trying to pull up memories from when I was 4 and 6 years old, vague images of family gatherings and kids playing in backyards. I recall one cousin seeming scared around his parents and hiding behind furniture when his father called his name, but I was too little to understand why he acted that way. Now I realize he was terrified because he knew something was wrong, that his parents looked at him differently than other parents looked at their kids. I describe another cousin crying at a family barbecue when his mother grabbed his arm too hard and how the adults all laughed and said he was being dramatic. The prosecutor asks me to identify family members in old photos and point out which ones are now confirmed murderers. And it's surreal to look at pictures of birthday parties and holidays, knowing some of those smiling adults killed their own children within months of those photos being taken. The trial drags on for 7 weeks total, with endless testimony from FBI agents, forensic accountants, medical examiners, and family members who turned state's evidence. I stay with my foster family during the jury deliberation and try not to obsess over every possible outcome, but I check my phone constantly waiting for updates from Victoria. 3 days pass while the jury reviews evidence and debates verdicts, and I barely sleep because I keep imagining scenarios where my parents get acquitted and come after me for revenge. My foster dad takes away my phone on the third night and makes me watch a movie with them to distract my brain from spinning in circles. But I can't focus on the screen because I'm too busy wondering if the jury believes all the evidence or if they think I'm just a kid who wanted attention. The verdicts come back guilty on all major charges for my parents, grandparents, and 4 aunts and uncles who were part of the core operation. Multiple counts of fraud, child abuse, conspiracy, and 3 counts of first-degree murder spread across different family members who participated in killing children. Victoria calls me immediately after the verdicts are read, and I can hear relief in her voice when she says the jury believed everything and convicted on every significant charge. My parents were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, even though they didn't personally kill my cousin, because they helped plan the operation and coached others on how to stage deaths for maximum settlement payouts. Sentencing day arrives 3 weeks after the verdicts come in. I sit between my foster parents in the same courtroom where I testified, watching the judge enter. My father starts yelling before anyone can speak, standing up from the defense table and pointing at me. He screams that I destroyed everything, that I'm dead to him, that I ruined the family's future. His voice echoes off the walls while his lawyer tries to pull him back down. The judge bangs her gavel twice and tells him to sit. My father keeps screaming, calling me a traitor and saying I'll regret this for the rest of my life. 2 bailiffs move toward him, and the judge orders them to remove him from the courtroom. They grab his arms and he fights against them, still yelling as they drag him toward the door. The judge adds 6 months to his sentence for contempt of court. Watching him get hauled away feels like a tiny victory, the first time anyone ever stopped him from hurting me with his words. The sentencing continues without my father in the room. The judge reads my mother's sentence first because she's sitting closest to the bench. 40 years for fraud, child abuse, and conspiracy to commit murder. My mother's face stays blank like she's watching a boring movie instead of hearing she'll die in prison. The judge brings my father back in handcuffs for his sentencing, and he stares straight ahead while she speaks. Life without parole for first-degree murder of my cousin. The words hang in the air, and I realize he'll never leave prison, never hurt another kid, never collect another settlement. My grandmother gets 30 years, my grandfather gets 40. My aunts and uncles get sentences between 20 and 50 years depending on what they did. Each one stares at me while the judge reads their sentence like this is all my fault, instead of theirs. Walking out of the courthouse after everything is done, I feel relief wash over me, but also guilt that makes my stomach hurt. The sun is too bright after sitting in that dark courtroom for hours. My foster parents walk on either side of me, while reporters shout questions from behind barriers. I saved Jamie from becoming like them. I exposed murderers who killed children for money. But I also destroyed my entire extended family and put multiple relatives in prison forever. 12 people are going to prison because I gave Jamie that phone. Some of them will die there. My foster mom squeezes my hand and tells me I'm safe now, but safe doesn't fix the weight of knowing I'm the reason my whole family fell apart. Doctor. Fernandez schedules an emergency session for the next morning. I sit in his office staring at the carpet while he waits for me to talk. Finally, I tell him I feel like I destroyed the family, like maybe I should have found a different way that didn't put everyone in prison. He leans forward in his chair and reminds me that I didn't destroy the family. They destroyed themselves through their choices. They chose to hurt kids. They chose to commit fraud. They chose to kill children for money. But knowing that in my brain doesn't stop the emotional weight of being the one who turned them all in. I'm the one who made the choice to give Jamie that phone. I'm the one who caused the FBI raid. Doctor. Fernandez says I saved lives, including my own, but it still feels like I broke something that can't be fixed. 2 weeks later, Angela, Aaron, and I meet with a victim compensation lawyer in a small office downtown. The lawyer is a woman with gray hair who talks slowly and carefully, like she knows we're fragile. She explains we're entitled to restitution from the stolen settlement money the FBI recovered. $4 million split between all the victims, which includes us and the corporations they defrauded. The amount won't undo the damage they caused or fix Angela's hand or erase Aaron's memories of food poisoning, but it might pay for college and ongoing therapy for all of us. The lawyer says the money should come through in about 6 months after the appeals process finishes. Aaron asks how much we'll each get, and she says probably around $50,000 per person. It's not enough, but it's something. My social worker calls me on a Tuesday afternoon while I'm doing homework. She says Jamie's foster family wants to talk to me. They called her office to say Jamie keeps asking about me, wondering if I'm okay and when she can see me. Her foster parents want to arrange supervised visits so she can maintain connection with the cousin who saved her from the cycle. My heart pounds while I tell the social worker, yes, I want to see Jamie. We schedule the first visit for Saturday at a park near her foster home. The social worker reminds me the foster parents will be present the whole time, and I need to be careful not to discuss the trial or her parents. I agree to everything, because I just want to see that she's actually safe. Saturday comes, and I meet Jamie at a park with wooden playground equipment and picnic tables. Her foster parents are a couple in their 40s who smile at me but stay close. Jamie is wearing a pink jacket, and her hair is in braids. She's shy at first, standing behind her foster mom and peeking around at me. I sit down on a bench and tell her it's good to see her. She walks over slowly and sits next to me, swinging her legs because they don't reach the ground. We talk about school and her new friends and the cat her foster family has. Then she leans against me and whispers that I'm a good person. Her voice is so quiet I almost miss it. I almost break down crying right there, but I hold it together because I don't want to scare her. Her foster dad suggests we walk to the playground, and Jamie grabs my hand like it's the most natural thing in the world. Aaron calls me 3 weeks after our visit with the lawyer. His voice sounds different, excited instead of flat and tired. He tells me he got accepted to a community college with a full scholarship for foster youth. The program covers tuition, books, and a housing stipend. He's going to study psychology because he wants to help other kids who survived abuse. He wants to turn his trauma into something that matters, use what happened to us to protect other children. I tell him I'm proud of him and mean it. He says he starts classes in January and asks if I'll come visit his campus once he moves into the dorms. I promise I will. After we hang up, I sit on my bed feeling something close to hope for the first time in months. Aaron is building a future instead of just surviving the past. Angela's lawyer calls her with news about a different lawsuit. She decides to pursue legal action against the corporations that settled with our family over the years. Her lawyer argues the companies were negligent in not investigating obvious fraud patterns when the same family kept having accidents at their locations. Walmart, Target, McDonald's, Red Lobster, all of them paid settlements without questioning why one family had so many incidents. The lawyer says Angela might win damages because the corporations had a responsibility to investigate instead of just paying out to avoid bad publicity. Angela asks me and Aaron if we want to join the lawsuit, but I'm not sure. Part of me wants the corporations to pay for enabling our parents. Another part of me just wants to move forward without more court dates and testimonies. I sit in Dr. Fernandez's office, struggling with whether to change my last name. My foster parents offered to let me take their name when the adoption goes through, but I don't know if I want to. Keeping my birth name means carrying the family legacy everywhere I go. Changing it feels like erasing who I was, pretending the first 15 years of my life didn't happen. Dr. Fernandez says there's no right answer, and I need to decide what helps me move forward rather than stay trapped in the past. But I don't know what moving forward looks like. I don't know if I can ever really escape what they made me into. He reminds me I have time to decide, that I don't have to choose today or tomorrow. The adoption paperwork won't be finalized for months. I leave his office still uncertain, carrying both names in my head like two different versions of myself. The news coverage hits 3 days after the verdicts come back. Every major network runs the story with headlines calling it the family fraud murder cult and showing courthouse footage of my relatives being led away in handcuffs. My foster parents, Clark and Susan, try to keep me away from the television and internet, but it doesn't matter because kids at my new school figure out who I am within a week. Someone's older brother recognizes my face from the news and posts about it on social media, and suddenly everyone knows I'm the kid who exposed 3 generations of criminals. Walking through the hallways feels like being under a microscope. Some students whisper and point when I pass, others avoid making eye contact like they're scared of me. A girl in my English class tells me I'm brave for what I did, which makes me uncomfortable because I don't feel brave at all. Two guys from the football team corner me near my locker and ask if my family really killed kids for money, and I just walk away without answering because I can't talk about it without my hands shaking. The principal calls me into her office to ask if I'm being harassed, and I lie and say everything is fine because I don't want special treatment or more attention. At lunch, I sit alone in the corner of the cafeteria with my headphones on, pretending to do homework while avoiding everyone's stares. Some kids treat me like I'm some kind of hero, which feels worse than the ones who avoid me. A sophomore tells me I did the right thing and asks if I'm going to write a book about it, and I want to scream that this isn't some exciting story. It's my actual life that got destroyed. 3 girls from my biology class invite me to sit with them at lunch, but I can tell they just want details about the trial and the murders, so I make an excuse about needing to study. The attention makes me want to disappear, to be invisible and normal like other kids who worry about grades and dating, instead of whether their parents are getting shanked in prison. But being normal is impossible now because my face was on national television and my family's crimes are public record that anyone can Google. I start eating lunch in the library where it's quiet and nobody bothers me, spending the period reading random books to avoid thinking about the stares and whispers. Dr. Fernandez schedules an extra session when my foster parents tell him about the school situation. I sit in his office picking at my fingernails while he waits for me to talk, and finally I admit that I keep hoping this will all go away somehow. He asks what I mean, and I explain that part of me still thinks maybe my parents will get released on appeal, or my extended family will forgive me, or things will go back to how they were before I ruined everything. Dr. Fernandez leans forward and says gently that I need to accept the reality that I'll never have a normal family. My parents will die in prison, my extended family is destroyed, and the only relatives I can maintain relationships with are Aaron, Angela, and Jamie. He says this isn't about punishment or giving up hope. It's about accepting what is, so I can start building something new instead of waiting for something that will never happen. The words hit me hard because hearing it out loud makes it real in a way it wasn't before. I ask him how I'm supposed to just accept that everyone I grew up with either hates me or is in prison, and he says acceptance doesn't mean being okay with it. It means acknowledging the truth, so the truth stops controlling me. We spend the rest of the session talking about what family means and whether blood relatives matter more than people who actually care about my well-being. 6 months after the sentencing, the nightmares start. I wake up at 3 a.m, drenched in sweat, my heart racing from dreams about my cousin who drowned at the hotel pool. In the dreams, he's standing at the edge of the water asking why I didn't save him too, and I try to explain that I was only 4 years old when he died, but he just keeps staring at me with this sad, disappointed look. Sometimes the dream changes and I'm older, watching my aunt and uncle hold him under the water while I stand frozen on the pool deck doing nothing to help. I wake up sobbing into my pillow, trying to stay quiet so I don't wake Clark and Susan, but Susan hears me anyway and comes to sit on the edge of my bed. She doesn't ask questions, just hands me tissues and stays there until I calm down enough to go back to sleep. The nightmares come 3 or 4 times a week, always variations on the same theme of me failing to save him. Dr. Fernandez says survivor's guilt is normal, but that doesn't make it easier to handle. I tell him I logically know I was too young to help anyone, but my brain doesn't care about logic at 3 a.m. when I'm dreaming about a dead kid asking why I let him die. Aaron calls me on a Tuesday evening and asks if we can make it a regular thing, talking once a week to check in on each other. I agree immediately because hearing his voice makes me feel less alone in this mess. Some weeks we barely talk, just confirming we're both still alive and functioning before hanging up after 10 minutes. Other weeks we spend hours on the phone processing memories and supporting each other through the ongoing nightmare of having our entire family in prison. Aaron tells me about his new therapist and the group sessions for foster youth he's attending, and I tell him about school and the nightmares about our cousin. We develop this unspoken agreement not to talk about our parents directly because it's too painful, but we can talk about everything else. Aaron mentions he's thinking about visiting Angela at her foster placement upstate, and I say I want to come too if she's okay with it. He says he'll ask her and let me know. The weekly calls become the one stable thing in my life, knowing that every Tuesday at 7 o'clock my phone will ring and Aaron will be there. Angela's lawyer calls her with news about the lawsuit settlement 8 months after the trial ends. The corporations agreed to settle for $300,000 total, rather than go through a lengthy trial about their negligence in not investigating our family's obvious fraud patterns. Angela's lawyer takes his cut, and she's left with about $250,000 after legal fees. She calls Aaron and me separately to tell us she's splitting the money 3 ways because we all suffered and we all deserve compensation for what our parents stole from us. I try to argue that the lawsuit was her idea and her effort, but she cuts me off and says we're in this together whether we like it or not. Aaron accepts his share without argument, and I finally agree because refusing would hurt Angela's feelings. The check arrives 2 weeks later, and I stare at it for a long time before depositing it into my new bank account. $83,000 feels like blood money, payment for years of abuse and manipulation, but it's also the first financial security I've ever had. I meet with Dr. Fernandez to discuss what to do with the settlement money, and he suggests putting most of it toward my future instead of spending it now. We talk about intensive trauma therapy and college savings, planning for a life beyond just surviving the present. I open a savings account specifically for college and deposit $60,000, then use $15,000 to pay for twice-weekly therapy sessions with a specialist in complex childhood trauma. The remaining $8,000 I keep in checking for emergencies and basic expenses. Dr. Fernandez says planning for the future helps fight the feeling that my past has destroyed everything, giving me something to work toward instead of just running away from what happened. I tell him it feels weird to use money that came from our family's crimes to build a better life, and he reminds me that the settlement came from the corporations who enabled the abuse, not from the fraudulent lawsuits themselves. The distinction doesn't make me feel much better, but I try to focus on the fact that I'm using the money for therapy and education instead of gambling or drugs like my parents would have done. Jamie's foster parents contact me through the social worker 9 months after everything happened. They explain that Jamie talks about me constantly and asks when she can see me again, and they want to know if I'd be willing to participate in a formal mentoring program where I'd be her designated big brother figure. The program involves monthly supervised visits, phone calls, and attending some of her school events if I'm comfortable with that level of involvement. I tell the social worker yes before she even finishes explaining the details, because maintaining connection with Jamie feels like the one purely good thing I did in this entire nightmare. We schedule the first official visit for the following Saturday at a community center where the program operates. I spend the week before the visit nervous about what to say to her and whether she'll still want me around now that the immediate crisis is over. But when I arrive at the community center and see Jamie waiting with her foster parents, she runs over and hugs me, and I know I made the right choice agreeing to this. My foster parents, Clark and Susan, sit me down at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning 10 months after I moved in with them. Susan makes coffee, and Clark sets out muffins, and I know something important is coming because they're being extra careful with their words. Clark clears his throat and explains that they've had me for 8 months now, and they've been thinking about the future. Susan takes over and says they want to offer me permanency and stability by adopting me when I turn 16, if I'm comfortable with that arrangement. They emphasize that it's completely my choice, and they won't be hurt if I need more time or decide against it entirely. I sit there frozen because I never expected this conversation, never thought about having actual parents instead of just temporary foster placement. Susan asks if I need time to think about it, and I nod without speaking because my throat feels tight, and I don't trust my voice not to crack. I spend 3 days thinking about the adoption offer before bringing it up in therapy. Dr. Fernandez asks what's holding me back, and I admit that accepting a new family feels like betraying Aaron and Angela, like I'm replacing them or moving on without them. He reminds me that having safe adults in my life doesn't erase my siblings or mean I care about them less. Aaron and Angela will always be my brother and sister, regardless of what last name I have or who my legal parents are. Dr. Fernandez explains that family isn't a limited resource where loving one person means having less love for others, and that Aaron and Angela probably want me to have stability, even if it's something they don't have themselves. I tell him I'm scared that accepting the adoption means admitting my original family is really gone forever, and he says that's exactly what it means, but pretending otherwise won't bring them back or undo what they did. The session ends with me still uncertain, but understanding that I need to make a choice based on what's best for my future, not what feels safest for my past. I call Aaron that night and tell him about the adoption offer. He's quiet for a long time on the other end of the phone, and I can hear him breathing while he thinks about what to say. Finally, he tells me he thinks I should do it, that having real parents who want to protect me is something he wishes he could have too. His foster placement is just temporary until he turns 19 and ages out of the system, and then he'll be on his own without any safety net or family support. He says he wants at least one of us to have real stability instead of just surviving until we're old enough to be kicked out. I tell him it feels wrong to have something he doesn't have, like I'm abandoning him by accepting this family, but he cuts me off and says that's stupid thinking. He reminds me that we're brothers no matter what last name I have or who my legal parents are, and that me being safe doesn't hurt him or take anything away from our relationship. We talk for another hour about memories from before everything fell apart, and when we hang up, I feel like maybe accepting the adoption isn't betraying anyone. I tell Clark and Susan the next morning that I want them to adopt me. Susan cries and hugs me while Clark shakes my hand like we're making an official agreement, and then they explain what the legal process looks like. They have to file paperwork with the court, get approval from my social worker, and wait for a judge to finalize everything, which usually takes about 6 months. It feels strange and scary to commit to this new family after spending my whole life performing for parents who only valued me as income, but it also feels like maybe I can have something stable and safe for the first time ever. Susan takes me shopping for school supplies that afternoon and lets me pick out everything I want without checking price tags or calculating how much money each item might generate in a future lawsuit. The simple act of buying a backpack because I like the color instead of because it fits some scheme makes me want to cry in the middle of the store. Angela calls me a week later with news that she got accepted to college with a full scholarship for former foster youth. She's planning to study social work with a focus on child protective services because she wants to help identify abuse that other people might miss. She tells me she knows all the signs now, all the patterns that teachers and doctors should have caught in our family but didn't, and she wants to be the person who actually pays attention to kids who seem wrong. Her settlement money from the corporations will cover her living expenses and therapy, so she won't have to work while she's studying. I tell her I'm proud of her for turning everything we went through into something that might help other kids, and she says she's proud of me for saving Jamie before she got pulled all the way into the cycle. We talk about Aaron and agree we need to stay connected as siblings, even though we're all in different places now, building separate lives from the ruins of our destroyed family. The three of us create a group chat the next day where we can share small victories and support each other through bad days. Aaron posts about getting a B on his psychology exam. Angela shares a photo of her college acceptance letter, and I tell them about the adoption process starting. It's not the family we should have had, with parents who actually loved us and protected us from harm, but it's the family we're building ourselves from what's left. We make a rule that we have to check in at least once a day, even if it's just to say we're okay, because none of us wants to lose contact with the only people who really understand what we survived. Some days the chat is full of messages and jokes. Other days it's just 3 people saying they're having nightmares and need to know they're not alone. Dr. Fernandez says this kind of sibling support is crucial for our healing, that we're creating the safety net our parents should have provided, but never did. Jamie starts writing me letters every week through her foster parents. They're written in careful kid handwriting on lined paper, telling me about her new school and the friends she's making, and how her foster mom lets her pick out her own clothes. She draws pictures of her foster family's dog and the playground near their house, and every letter ends with her saying she's happy and safe now. Reading about her thriving in safety makes everything I went through to save her feel worthwhile, even the parts where I destroyed my entire extended family and put multiple relatives in prison. Her foster parents include notes thanking me for what I did and saying Jamie talks about me constantly as the cousin who protected her. They want to arrange more visits once the court approves their adoption of her, so we can maintain our relationship as she grows up. I keep all her letters in a box under my bed and reread them when I'm having bad days and questioning whether exposing the family was the right choice. The state legislative committee contacts me 2 months after the trial ends. They want me to testify about fraud patterns and child abuse indicators so they can pass new laws requiring investigation when families have multiple accident claims. I spend a week preparing with their staff lawyers, going over every detail of how our operation worked and what red flags should have triggered earlier intervention. Standing in front of the committee feels different from testifying at the criminal trial, less about punishing my family and more about preventing future kids from suffering the same way. I explain how my mother coached us on testimony, how my father created authentic injuries for bigger payouts, how the corporations settled quickly without investigating obvious patterns. Several committee members look sick by the time I finish describing Aaron's deliberate food poisoning at age 7. They passed the legislation 3 weeks later, requiring insurance companies and corporations to report families with more than 3 accident claims in 5 years for mandatory investigation. My story helped create a law that might actually protect kids whose parents see them as profit sources instead of children. Dr. Fernandez reduces my therapy to once a week because I'm making real progress in managing my PTSD symptoms. I still have bad days where I can't get out of bed, still have nightmares about my father hitting me with the phone book, still flinch when people move too quickly near me. But I'm learning to function despite the permanent damage, learning to recognize when I'm having flashbacks versus reacting to actual danger. He says, I'll probably need therapy for the rest of my life to manage the trauma, but that's okay, because healing isn't about being fixed. It's about learning to live with what happened. Some weeks I only see him once and feel fine. Other weeks I need emergency sessions because something triggered a memory I can't handle alone. He reminds me that progress isn't linear, that having bad days doesn't erase the good days, and that I'm doing better than most people would after exposing murderers in their own family. My adoption is finalized 6 months after Clark and Susan first asked me. We stand in family court while the judge signs the paperwork making me legally their son, and I have to fight not to cry in front of everyone. Standing in court with people who actually want to protect me instead of exploit me feels surreal and overwhelming in the best way possible. The judge congratulates us and says she's glad to see a positive outcome from such a difficult case, and Clark shakes my hand again while Susan hugs me tight. They give me a card that night with my new birth certificate inside, showing their last name instead of my biological parents' name, and it feels like proof that I really do get to start over. Aaron and Angela send messages in our group chat, celebrating the adoption, saying they're happy at least one of us has real parents now, and I promise them we're still siblings, no matter what my legal documents say. Aaron, Angela, and I visit Jamie together for the first time since everything happened. Her foster parents arrange it at a park where we can all spend the afternoon together without too much structure or pressure. Jamie runs to hug each of us when we arrive, and seeing all 4 of us cousin siblings together and safe feels like proof that exposing the family was the right choice despite the cost. We push her on the swings and play on the playground equipment while her foster parents watch from a nearby bench, giving us space to reconnect. Jamie tells us about her new school and shows us a spelling test she got 100% on, and Aaron picks her up and spins her around while she giggles. For a few hours, we're just kids playing in a park instead of abuse survivors dealing with trauma, and it's the closest thing to normal any of us have felt in years. When it's time to leave, Jamie makes us all promise to visit again soon, and we take a group photo that Angela posts in our chat with the caption, "The family we chose." I start my junior year of high school with my new legal name and my adoptive parents' support. Kids at the school know my story because the trial was all over the news, and some of them treat me like a celebrity, while others avoid me completely. I'm learning to set boundaries about what I'll discuss and what stays private, telling people I don't want to talk about the details when they ask invasive questions. My guidance counselor checks in with me weekly to make sure I'm handling the attention okay, and Clark and Susan told the principal to shut down any bullying immediately. Some days are harder than others, walking through hallways knowing everyone sees me as the kid who sent his whole family to prison, but other days, I can almost pretend I'm just a normal teenager worried about homework and grades. I joined the chemistry club because Mr. Rodriguez is the advisor, and having him around feels like having someone who understood what I was going through before I even knew myself. He never brings up what happened unless I want to talk about it, just treats me like any other student who needs help with lab reports and college applications. I graduate from high school with Clark and Susan in the audience cheering louder than anyone else when they call my name. Aaron drives 3 hours to attend, and Angela takes time off from her college classes to be there, and seeing them all together supporting me feels like proof that we built something real from the wreckage. Jamie sends me a card with a drawing of all 5 of us holding hands, and I keep it in my wallet, even though it gets worn from me looking at it constantly. College starts in the fall, and I'm studying social work like Angela, because I want to help identify abuse patterns that others miss. My first semester is hard because some professors assign cases that hit too close to home, but Dr. Fernandez helps me develop boundaries between my trauma and my professional goals. Clark and Susan visit me at college every few weeks, and we have dinner together like a normal family, which still feels strange and wonderful after years of performances and fear. Aaron gets engaged to someone he met at community college and asks me to be his best man, saying I'm the brother who saved his life, even if I couldn't save his childhood. Angela wins a scholarship for abuse survivors and uses the money to start a nonprofit helping kids recognize fraud and exploitation in their own families. Jamie turns 13, and her foster parents formally adopt her, giving her the stable home she deserves and ending the legal uncertainty that haunted her for years. Doctor. Fernandez and I meet on the first Tuesday of every month in his office, where we process the ongoing weight of what I carry. Some sessions I talk about the guilt of destroying my family, even though they were murderers and abusers who deserved prison. Other sessions I just sit quietly, while he reminds me that survival is enough and I don't have to justify saving myself and Jamie. The nightmares about my murdered cousin still come sometimes, and I wake up crying because I was too young to save him, but my brain insists I should have known. Aaron calls me when he has bad days, and I call Angela when the nerve damage in her hand flares up and reminds her of our parents celebrating her injury. We formed a group chat years ago, and we still use it daily to share small victories and support each other through the hard moments that never completely stop coming. I helped Jamie escape the cycle and exposed 3 generations of criminals who killed children for money, but the cost was every blood relative I had and a childhood I'll spend my whole life grieving. Some mornings I wake up proud of what I did, and other mornings I'm just tired from carrying the weight of it all. But I'm 20 years old now with people who actually love me and a future that belongs to me instead of my parents' greed. I survived something that should have destroyed me, and I'm learning slowly that being a real person means I get to choose my own path instead of performing someone else's script. That's today's story wrapped up. I'm really happy you were here to share it with me. I hope it brought a little light or peace to your day.